All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for being here. This is the time for us to chat a little bit about what it looks like to report on the data that we've been collecting. So for each of you, that may be fall semester. Because we got a water bottle up here if we need it. So for each of you, this may mean collecting data during the fall semester, during the spring semester, or a combination of both. So I hope what comes across today is just excitement and enthusiasm for kind of as we conclude the cycle of this process for this year. Really seeing this as an opportunity to document evidence, yes, but also to have a chance to collaborate, to share the data that we've been collecting, and then also to look towards, right, sharing those stories of learning and improvement, and also sharing stories of how we are going to act as a result of this data. So the time together today will just be kind of briefly framing this work again, situating it within our assessment processes and what we are accomplishing. We will also then look at the documentation, so looking at the assessment report, so reflecting on the assessment plan. Here, Tisha, I'm giving you this water whether you like it or not. There you go. Reflecting on our plan and then looking towards the deliverable of the assessment report. And then also we're going to kind of talk through and look through the peer review panel proposal process. It's a lot of P's, but the peer review panel, looking at that proposal process and how we can leverage this data for additional resources for our classroom and our programs. So that's kind of the scope of the training today, making sure that you feel ready for the end deliverable, which the due date is in May, and then also make sure that collectively we have a strong understanding of the purpose of this document within the institutional assessment process, but also how we can leverage this process and this data through the peer review panel to advocate and ask for additional resources for our classrooms and for our programs. Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Let me pull up these slides again. All right, so again, just to situate our work today and our conversation today within this larger work of assessment here at the institution. As assessment follows, we are aware, right, that assessment is this systematic, ongoing process that is aimed at understanding and improving student learning. So here at Triton, I really want to emphasize that these assessment results that we are reporting on should lead to tangible action. So I'm going to repeat this several times today. But in filling out your assessment report, if that doesn't mean anything to you or you're not going to be able to act on those results, something went wrong, right? So not in terms of judgment like you did something wrong, right? And we're not going to accept the report, but if that information, that data is not usable and actionable and meaningful to you, something went wrong in the process, right? This report should be, and we're going to touch on this later, something that you share with your colleagues that we can, have actions or make decisions based off of. So that's really what we're looking for. We're not looking for, yeah, I filled out the form, check, Lauren's not going to send me obnoxious emails anymore, right? But it's really this idea of when we fill out this report and we tell the story of our process, that we have things that we can take away from that process and we can use that to improve teaching and learning in the classroom. Also, that this goal of assessment is the constant improvement of student learning. So really the purpose, again, is not just checking off these boxes. It's not the documentation, although that is important, but it's using this documentation and this evidence with the goal of continuing to improve student learning. So hopefully none of this information is new to you. If you've been engaged in this process, you've heard this, right? But again, just situating our work in our goal of assessment here at Triton. So this assessment process, again, hopefully nothing new, but driven by faculty questions about student learning and teaching effectiveness. And this process is then shared with the campus community. I'm going to talk about several opportunities to do that. But in this documentation, that becomes then our launching point to share this information with our colleagues in our departments and areas as assessment fellows, right, kind of within this fellowship to share what we're each doing in our programs and in our courses, and then with the larger campus community, including students, right? And then, again, having opportunities to discuss these results, to share, have conversations, and then determine actions. How does this data then inform decision making? So do we ask for, right, additional resources either through the peer review panel or through the institutional budgeting process? Are there curriculum changes that need to be made? Is there opportunity for professional development among faculty teaching in this program or in this course? So again, having these this process lead to action and informed decision making. So the assessment cycle, we've seen this before. We started this process at the program level by identifying those outcomes, so either revising or creating our program level outcomes. That was our work last year. This year we've built our assessment plans, and so this last fall and then in the spring, depending on your plan, you've been collecting that data on student learning. So now we're getting to the phase, right, after collecting, this documentation will give you a space and time to reflect on that, right? You've gathered the data, and in filling out the report, that's the space and time to really reflect on that. How do we interpret that data? And you'll hopefully see in that documentation, yes, we have a space for those numbers, but we also have a space for faculty expertise to inform that. Right? So yes, we have the raw data, the numbers, how many students participated, the percentage of answering correctly or who met that that target or that learning outcome. But there's also space for the faculty expertise to weigh in as well, right? So data informed decision making, but partnered with faculty expertise, and that's where, again, your role as assessment fellows comes in as the content area expertise and as the expert in the classroom. What does this data mean to you, and how do you use that to inform teaching and learning? And then there's also going to be a space to plan based on evidence, but not only just a plan, right? It's not only just, I wish I could get this, or this would really help, but then we have these tangible next steps of how then do we allocate resources to improve student learning as a result of this data and this evidence. So the idea is that we're closing this entire loop in the next steps of the process, right? Do you have any questions at this point? Okay. So, like I've showed these dates before, but again, very tangibly, all of our assessment plans were due September 15th in the fall, and the assessment reports are due May 15th. Because many faculty, right, leave campus after graduation, we're going to be a little bit stricter on this deadline. So May 15th, before you leave campus, turn it in, right? So harder deadline this one, because we want to make sure, enjoy your summer if you're on break, or if you're coming back to campus to teach. We want this submitted and documented by the end of the semester, right? So for some of you, if you were collecting in the fall, after today, right, you put in your data from the fall. If the data that you're collecting during the spring semester takes place earlier, middle, right, as soon as that data is done, you can fill that out. So you don't have to turn it in late May or mid-May. You can absolutely turn it in depending on your assessment plan and process at any point this semester when it's appropriate for you. So I've already had some assessment plans or reports turned in. Again, depending on your data collection, it could be a variety of places or times throughout the semester. But to accommodate those who may be using their final exam for their data collection, we've given the later deadline to do that. But that is by no means you have to wait till May if you are ready and prepared to do so. Okay. That being said, I will be, on campus through graduation. So if you guys have questions or need support, if you are doing it later in May, I'm here and there'll be support for you to do that. Okay. So let's talk about this documentation and how we are going to effectively kind of turn in this deliverable by May. So I want you to keep in mind when filling out this documentation, we're going to get super nitty gritty into like where do we put where, right? What do we put in these boxes? But essentially, in creating these documents, this is what I've tried to capture for all of us. How do we know that students learned what was intended, right? So in our program, we want them to meet these outcomes. How do we know that, right? So performing your assessment, what does achievement of learning look like, right? So in that paper, in that presentation, in that final exam, what does it look like to say like, yes, students have met this? And then what have we learned about student learning that we can use to improve or that we can act on for the future, right? So before we get tied up in the nitty-gritties of what information goes where, that is the spirit in which that I hope you engage in this process, is that this is our way as an institution of documenting this information and documenting this process. So yes, we're emphasizing documentation and evidence in order to share with our colleagues, in order to share with our campus community, including our institutional accreditor, but the emphasis is on thinking about it in these ways and ultimately leading towards that final question of what can we do and act on for the future. Okay. All right. Now, I shared this at the beginning when we were talking about our assessment plans, and I wanted to re-emphasize it here because there are some important considerations for us. And on the front end, we talked about what you might do, and now on the back end, I want to make sure that we are documenting and including this as well. So some important considerations for us when we're doing program level assessment. There's a specific course that I know this is where a student should learn this information and should be able to demonstrate this. We want to have or be considerate and be intentional about ensuring that our adjunct faculty are included in that, right? So again, if it's one course that's taught by a full-time faculty member, okay, that's fine. But also if there's a course that's taught by multiple adjunct faculty, we want to ensure that we're looping adjunct faculty into our assessment as well. The same thing with our dual credit courses. If you have a course that is also taught as a dual credit course, want to ensure that you're looping those faculty in on our assessment, and that is going to be something for all three of these. I will want you to document, to say explicitly, this assessment was also run in one dual credit course or in two dual credit courses, whatever that might be. Same thing for our online sections. If you are assessing something in a particular course, there are online sections of this course. We want to make sure that we're noting, this assessment was only done in the face-to-face sections, or this included online sections as well. So this is data because we were explicitly asked this by our institutional accreditors. How do we include these, additional considerations? We want to make sure we're documenting that. So if it included online sections that in your assessment report, that is something that you note as well. Okay, do you have any questions on this? We can talk through where might be the most appropriate place to do that on the documentation, but we spoke about this at the front end. I want to make sure that we're also reminding it on the back end to include these additional considerations. We want to make sure we're intentional about this as well. Okay. So again, the end result of this is we are collecting data to inform decision making, but this documentation allows us to identify opportunities for improvement, and it is also the platform by which we tell our stories of learning improvement. So this is the institution's way of documenting how we are collecting this data, what decisions are being made, and how we are influencing, impacting student learning in the future. So not too much pressure on your documentation, right? But this is where we're documenting this as an institution, along with other opportunities to share and have conversations about this as well. But in terms of record keeping, this is it. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the assessment report template. So on your table, you should have a table copy of your institution or the assessment report. I didn't want to kill too many trees, so I just printed out one per table for you to take a look at and walk through. I'm also going to pull it up digitally. So this assessment report should look strikingly familiar to the assessment plan that you filled out, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just pull up the example here so we can all refer to it together. I also wanted to share, I will send out an email with the assessment report template attached to everyone when I send out the recording link as well. But you can find all of this documentation on the assessment committee's portal page. So if you head to the portal under faculty resources, if you click on the academic assessment committee portal page, this documentation can be found here. So over on the right-hand side, you will see all of the assessment plans that were submitted. So if it was on a flash drive, you lost it, right? You're not sure where it is, can't find your email, your assessment plan will be posted here. So if you need to reflect on that or look at what you submitted, that is here. And then the report template that we're looking at today is listed there. So you'll be able to download it, pull it up, and fill it out. So head back to the portal page. I will also attach it in the email, but multiple ways to get access to this document digitally. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. And we're going to walk through this together. All right, so let's take a look. Again, the front page, for the most part, you should be able to copy and paste this from your plan, right? So we're just asking you, again, name, department area, the type of assessment, whether it was program course, the program level outcomes, or the course level outcomes. So if you pull up your assessment plan, pull up the template, this kind of cover sheet should be almost identical, unless there were some changes, right? We're absolutely open to the fact that during this process, during conversations with your department, there could have been changes. So that's why we're asking you to submit it on the report end, is if there were any changes from your plan to your report, you would just make the changes on the cover here. So maybe you were planning on doing 3 outcomes, you only did 1, right? Whatever that might be, go ahead and make that those adjustments here. As you guys were filling out the plans on the front end, was there any confusion or questions that you had on this cover page? If we're looking at it now, was there anything that came up that I can make clear at this? My best advice would be open up your plan, copy and paste it over, and note any changes that there were in the process. So if there were no changes, it may seem like a duplicative effort. But again, we wanted to provide space. We didn't want to just assume that it was a carryover, and we wanted to provide space for you to submit changes if that was appropriate. Yes?
So not changes to the original assessment plan, but if I found that I should do something else, that comes later. If I
potentially both.
Okay, so I did an assessment in the fall,
Mm-hmm.
and I have another assessment, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
coming in late April.
Sure.
So if, based on my information from the fall, I should do something more than already done it, so that would come in line, what, to tweak?
Yes, or your report for the next round.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
So if you already did it, document what you did. And then for your next round, you would do a plan and then a report for that round. And then you can make any changes necessary in between. Mm-hmm. This is just changes here would be if you've changed anything during the course of the assignment that you now need to report differently than what you turned in on your plan.
What we originally.
Was your question, Jenny?
No.
Okay, great. So cover page is hopefully very clear. And please reach out with any questions. I will also highlight the fact that at the end of this process this year, we will be, of course, right, sending out an assessment of the process. And so documentation is up for grabs, right? If as you were filling this out, it was unclear, we can make any changes for our next round. That will be done before fall of next year. So please bring on the feedback as we ask for that. That would be really, really helpful for me. Okay, page 2 of the assessment reports. Again, very similar layout to the assessment plan. So we are asking at this top portion, this top table, is the report of your data, right? So it's saying, what are the program level outcomes or the course level outcomes that you measured? What were they? And here, if you listed them out on the cover page in its entirety, you can just say COL or CLO1 or PLO1 here. We don't need the whole text because it was filled out on the first page. So, for example, PLO1 and PLO2, right? List those out. What were your results? So, for example, in a final exam, 80% of the students achieved a 85 or higher, right? So some kind of report on your data. It's also important to give us your sample size. So you don't need to give us information student by student, right? I don't need to know, here are the students' course, and here are all of their grades or the percentages. But I do want to know how many students, right? Because that does impact if you had 100 students in your sample versus 8, right?
And are we putting that under results?
Results.
Yeah, so you could do the results section here. Any of that could go in there, right? So 80% of students, 100 students sampled or 100 students assessed, and how many met that learning target. The activity timeline, so maybe you planned on doing it fall and spring, you only collected spring. You planned on spring, but you ended up, fall and spring. All of that can be here. Also, I do know of a circumstance already in which the course didn't run, right? Plan for this course, activity timeline, you can say course didn't run, data wasn't collected because of that. Yeah?
Good question. So I've already collected all of my data for fall.
Yeah.
But the assumption was take the data from the first exam, take the data from the final exam, see if there is a progress.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm done with the fall, and I should fill out a separate report just for fall, and then separate report for spring. However, there is a complication because I will not have the final exam results for the spring. So because I'm collecting data every single semester for that particular class.
Yeah.
So should I just submit one report and report on the data from the fall semester, and then don't mention the data from spring? Or should I fill out two, what I'm saying, like how am I?
My inkling is to put it together, but I would want to have a conversation about what is going to be the most helpful or actionable to you. Like in the department, is it helpful to disaggregate that data by fall and spring? Or is it more impactful to have a larger sample size and report all of it at once in the spring semester? So I think for you, it's with you and your colleagues, like what is the most meaningful way? On my end, I have no preference.
As long as there's one report.
Yeah, at the end, yes. But I have faculty who have turned in fall and who intend on turning in spring. It doesn't.
But to her point, she may have a final on May 14th.
Yeah.
So I would maybe prep it, right, from fall semester, and then do your final, and then just be ready to put in that data on the 14th, right? So I would maybe do a table or whatever, a spreadsheet, have it all from fall, have ready as soon as you're done on that date, enter in the spring, and then turn it in then. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll
Get it in, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. The spirit of it is get it in before you leave. Yeah.
Well, then to kind of piggyback on that, if we do talk to adjunct or dual credit, do we combine all that?
Yes.
Do we?
Yes. You want all of the data, right, should be there, and then just say one online course included or 2 dual credits. So just note it. We want to note that we were intentional about including it.
So we want to note that, like, if I pulled stuff from another full-time or stuff from an adjunct, you want me to know pull from another faculty, pull from another adjunct?
I would say give all of the data, and then either in the results, or I would say here in the results, say, sample from full and part-time faculty, right? We don't necessarily need to know which sections where, just that they were included, right? That we were intentional about including all of our students regardless of location or instructor, right? We want to ensure, just note that was happening. I don't need to know which students were tied to which instructor, right? I don't need to know any of that. Just note that they were included. So when, right, for example, in our focus visit, our institutional creditor is, well, how do you know that you included your adjuncts? This wasn't just full-time faculty. Oh, well, here in our documentation, right, you can see where our adjunct faculty were included. We have them as assessment fellows, right? They were included in our data collection. What about your online students? Yeah, we're intentional about including them, right? This is just our way of documenting and showing them, right? But yeah, in terms of reporting, I don't need to know, or we don't need to distinguish who from where, okay? Justina, was I clear on your answer? Okay. Yeah, and these are all really important questions, and we can try this out this way, right? And then if there are either on our side with documentation issues, or you may determine you prefer doing semester by semester, and that's totally okay too. Yeah?
Are we supposed to be collecting artifacts? So like if I'm looking at portfolios, do I need actual student portfolios?
I think it would be nice to include at least the instructions, right, of what you ask students to submit, because then on the back end, right, let's say you're not doing the assessment again, or it's fast forward 5 years, it's like, oh, how were you doing this? We have that institutional documentation. So we're more interested in the tool than the artifact.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah.
For assessments that are, for example, using rubrics
Yes.
as a tool, should include like a sample of the rubrics?
Yes. Yeah. The tool is helpful. Yeah. So the way that you are measuring is helpful. And if that wasn't included in your assessment plan, because several individuals said, hey, I want to use this, but I haven't created it, hasn't done it, the third page of this allows you to attach an updated assessment tool if needed. So that would be the case where if you didn't do it on the front end, attach your tool here, and then if there's any more detailed assessment results that you want to include as well. So if you need more space than given here and you don't want to expend this, have the table be 3 pages long, go ahead and just do an attachment, just say see attachment, and you can include, like for example, Justina, if you have a spreadsheet from your students from fall, students from spring, and you want to attach it, totally fine. Just say please see attached, and then you can have a longer
That's
version.
actually how I keep track of it.
Great, so yeah, if that's how you do it already, send it as an attachment and the results say see attached spreadsheet for data. Yeah, make it easier for sure. Okay, so we have our results. Obviously very, very important here. Activity timeline, when did you collect it? So you planned on doing it a particular semester. When did you actually do it? And then the data comparison. So on the plan, you have your target, right, or your benchmark for learning. How did students do, right? So you wanted 80% of students to get 80% or higher final exam. How did they do, right? Did 20% of students get that? Did 100%, right? It just gives us a target and a benchmark for that conversation, right? I really want to encourage that this by no means is punitive, right? By no means. And that's why I don't want to section things off by instructor, right? We want to pool all of our students. How did they do? Are they meeting expectations? Are they not? And this becomes the springboard for additional resources, right? So I really want this to be an empowering factor and by no means a punitive factor, right? So this is going to be an empowering factor because if students are not meeting the level of learning that we want them to, that is where we're going to start to turn towards the allocation of resources to demonstrate that we are allocating resources to improve student learning, okay? So once you fill out this table, so the outcomes, the results, the timeline, and the data comparison, now this is the space for some more of that qualitative information, right? So throughout this process, let's say your data came back, students are meeting, learning, that's great. But in the process, you realize that like some of the faculty who are teaching this course are not on the same page, right? Or you have not talked with other faculty about this kind of learning in your department before, and now you've met, you've talked about those results, right? These are the kinds of stories that we want to document and we want to celebrate as part of this process. So any of those side conversations in a department meeting, something that you became together with your colleagues on, something you learned about the student learning in your course that maybe wasn't a part of the assessment but was a great thing to capture anyways, that is a time for this, right? So provide any insights that you learned from the assessment's results. What have you learned about student learning? Again, the faculty viewpoint, so taking the data, but then applying that faculty expertise. What does this mean to me? What does that mean to my colleagues about student learning? How will you use this information to improve student learning? What changes, if any, will you make? How will you share that? So what is the data? What did we learn? How are we going to make changes? And then how are we going to share this? So I will provide a few examples already. As an assessment fellow, the idea of being rooted within a department, right? It's not just members of a committee who aren't in your department or area, but the intention of selecting someone from that department area is for you to be rooted and have the opportunity to share and have conversations with your colleagues. So bringing that up at a department meeting, right? When you have your results, getting time on a department meeting to share with your colleagues, talking in your offices, or sharing in a more informal capacity. Any other venues, right, within your department area, whatever your particular department culture is, would be a great opportunity to talk about, share the results, email it out to everyone, and then have a conversation about what that means. So that is really the idea of being rooted in the department, is having you be able and be in a capacity to have those conversations. Also, we have our Learning Improvement Week coming up, right? So we are going to have opportunities for, if you have data at that point in April, to be able to share your process, talk about it, and talk about some of the data, and then also talk about some of the changes. So we're definitely going to be looking for people to share some of their stories in that venue, and so that's another great opportunity and something to document that either you will do that or you have done that, right? So to document, yeah, I talked at Learning Improvement about my program and about what we did. Also, this last section here is going to be the launching point for what we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, the peer review panel process. So, do the efforts used to improve student learning require the addition of specific resources? So, any supplies, equipment, professional development, anything like that. And if that's the case, there are two avenues. There's the peer review panel, which is made up of assessment fellows and led by members of the assessment committee, and that panel has a budget of $30,000. So in this fiscal year, so by June 30th, we have $30,000 to spend on improving student learning instruction programs and in our courses. Next year, we'll have another $30,000. So we have this opportunity as assessment fellows, as faculty, to allocate and approve asks for improvement of student learning. There's also the institution's comparative budgeting process. So this is a process that is through assessment fellows, but then there's also the institution's comparative budgeting process, where that can get pushed through your chair, your dean, and become part of the institution's budgeting process. So there's two avenues to advocate for additional resources, and so we're going to talk about the peer review panel in just a moment. Right? Now, I'm really excited to see the results, and that is important, right? Documenting the results of our assessment is important. I'm also extremely excited about this piece, right? So this piece of what are the insights you learned, right? How are we going to share that? And what can we do to improve is the part that I'm most excited about in terms of reviewing this documentation and capturing this, right? So the third is, again, for any attachments, if you have an updated tool, or if you did submit your tool, also any detailed assessment results, if you need to do that, those are here as well. Okay, so like the plan, there's a lot of space for changes based on discipline, right, or different ways of reporting based on your assessment methods and measures. So there's going to be a lot of flexibility in this document, but with the idea of reporting on your data and sharing, the answers to these questions is the end goal. Do you guys have any questions on the report documents?
You're sharing with, I know you said share within your department, share it. Means would that also include sharing in an advisory meeting or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Because then we could get input on what they think.
Yes.
Okay.
Great avenue. And then also, depending again on your department, your area, and the culture, like how, to share with students, right? Is that something that if you're in a cohort model, right, and there was a group of students that did this assessment, sharing with them those answers or the results, and how as faculty and as students we can work to improve that, right? That can be great information to share. So also thinking about ways, there was a joke that was made, right, and I keep repeating it at a conference, but assessment's not something we do to students, right, it's something we do with them. So it's their data, right, it's their learning, so how do we then share the assessment results and what we're doing to improve? Because if you're making changes to your program or your course or the curriculum as a result of that, right, sharing with them how we're responding to that and we are improving student learning. So great question, Tori, thank you.
Yeah. Back to the results, where it says attach detailed results to the report.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, they have an exam, and that's where I'm gathering my information from. Do I need to include like the student with their,
No.
just the average of
Yeah.
whatever score? I'm
Yes,
looking for?
that is all you're required. So I would say a percentage, right, and a number. So we are really interested in the sample size, right? Like 80% of students, if it's 3, is very different from 80% of students if it's 300. So yes, sample size matters, but I don't need to see like details of every student in which courses, right, in which grade. More detailed in the sense, like for example, Justina, there were sections from fall, there were sections from spring, right? It's more than just like 1 or 2 lines. So if you need to provide more information for that reason, that's the opportunity to do that. The expectation is not student, grade, instructor, too much detail. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If we're compiling information also from adjuncts as well,
Mm-hmm.
I've had some trouble getting responses from people. Is there a way you should like notate that we got limited like feedback from certain people, or that our sample size is smaller?
I think that's totally appropriate to document. Like 10 instructors, information from 10 instructors was requested, 6 instructors, provided data or something like that. Yeah, I think that's totally appropriate to document. Mm-hmm. And then the hope being, right, in this report, as we share the data that is being reported on and how this can inform student learning, that we collectively as a campus begin to start to really recognize the value here of like, oh yeah, if I provide this data the next time, we could really start to make some informed choices about this. So that's the hope. Mm-hmm. And you being an advocate in your department for that. Yeah.
All right, so this isn't thinking about this time around, but next time around. So
Yeah, I love it.
I'm just thinking, if we're focusing on one class and we're all and this person we're just looking, we're trying to figure out, does the student understand this concept, right? But if the instructor tries to formulate how they found out that concept this way, and I do it this way, and you do it this way online,
Mm-hmm.
can we use all 3 of them and just put them on the back? Or do you want them to all be, because we're all looking for the same concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how we got it,
Mm-hmm.
we just want to know the student got it.
Right, or you can say, this number of students met our expectation, and it was measured by a final exam, by a portfolio, and by a paper.
Okay, and do you want them all 3 of those here?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right, that's
Yeah.
just. Okay.
Just the prompt of that and how it was collected
I'm
is
just thinking
helpful.
just about the adjuncts,
Mhm.
they have their own way of looking for the concept. I don't want
Yeah.
to come in as a faculty
Yeah,
and say,
yeah.
hey, by the way, you now need to do this.
Yes.
So, okay.
So I would disaggregate the data in reporting by method.
Okay.
So like final exam this, paper this, portfolio this, I would, because you can't really combine those.
Sure.
But then I would include all 3, right? And then you have your data, yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes, yes, Robert.
Yeah, I have a report for every class.
Mm-hmm.
We have approximately maybe 12 different automotive classes,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to the Honda and the General Motors.
Mm-hmm.
Do I need a report for every class, or can one service make it for all?
I would say it depends on the program outcomes that you said you were measuring this year.
Okay.
So if you said you were measuring all program outcomes, then you would need to provide information.
Multiple.
But for the institutional documentation, you don't have to. It's not a requirement to report on all program levels each year. It's within a 3-year cycle. So although you're collecting the data, you may only report on a particular outcome once every 3 years. We don't want the documentation to be overbearing. So even though you're collecting the data, you don't necessarily have to report on it every single year. You can choose, I'm going to do 3 program outcomes for the first year, 3 the next, and 1 the next. And then that's when you would report on them. I don't want you to feel like even though you're collecting the data, you have to report on every program outcome every year.
Well, they are pretty similar, all of them, because it's a little
So,
different than everyone else.
If you want to talk through that, we can
I
definitely.
will. I
Yeah.
will, maybe
Yeah.
via email.
Great, we can definitely talk through what's appropriate to share. And that again is, I think, a question that depends on the department, depends on the area, so we can get into that. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Gabe.
I was going to follow on that question that
Yeah.
when we prepared the plans, we wrote a menu, if you will, of assessment tools that can be used.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm very confident that I can, the way we do it in science is we include about 3 questions about a concept, and it doesn't matter who's teaching the class. It doesn't matter what kind of class. The science department, because it's about scientific method, right? So
Yes.
any student should know it,
Yeah.
regardless of who's teaching, what class, if it's astronomy or if it's biology, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
But we do actually design the questions, and we do ask them to include the questions in their own exams.
Yeah.
And then just give us the scores of those questions.
Yeah.
Specifically those questions.
Yes.
So it makes it a lot easier, right? They don't feel like they're forced to do something. I use rubrics all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm aware that somebody doesn't like to use rubrics or does not use rubrics and doesn't want to ask why or how to use them.
Yeah.
Be a little reluctant to do it that way.
Yeah.
Then an easier way is that we design the question. So the question is the same across the board.
Yeah.
And there's no variation between who's teaching it this way or who's teaching it that way or how the question is asked.
Sure.
And the question could be it could be made and I'm trying to say a question could be made really bad, right?
Yeah.
That is not really measuring much. So what we do is we do put the time into designing the questions, and it's not a whole lot.
Yeah.
It's no more than 3.
Yeah.
That
everyone
add
distributes.
into all of their
Yes.
tests. And the only extra what they have to do is, as you are grading your test, your students' test, just tell us how the results of those 3 questions are.
Right.
So we can actually say that across the board.
They're all the same.
Yeah,
method.
we really need to
Yeah.
address these in a particular way.
Yeah.
Everybody met that.
Yep. No, that's great, Gabe, and thank you for sharing, because that's really helpful to hear how different departments and areas do it, because we have a variety in a room like this. So for example, national standardized exam, everyone's taking the same thing, right? Not here at Triton, everyone's taking the same thing. So we know how our students are performing, and we can benchmark them to other students in different area community colleges, right? Something in the middle where, for example, like there's several departments that do department final exams, right? Very easy to collect data. Every student in that course takes the final exam, and we know based on the questions how students are performing, right? There's also departments here, for example, some kind of coordinated effort like that. And I think that's a great example of how you're not necessarily telling faculty how they have to measure it, but in this small capacity for this department effort, right, we're going to do 3 questions, they're going to be standard, everyone's going to do it, and you're going to contribute to that department effort. And then there's other courses that each instructor, has their own way of measuring those outcomes. So there's a variety of instances across campus, but I think that's a great example of low burden, where you're still accomplishing the goal of having all students participate in a standard measure of learning. It's great. These are the examples and the stories that I really hope come across. kind of the rest of this semester, as well as at Learning Improvement Week, where now that we've really engaged in this first cycle of our new processes, being able to share and talk about and get ideas from the fellows who've been engaged in this process. So I'm looking forward to that. All right. We have a few minutes left, so I'm not going to go too in-depth on this, but I wanted to make sure that A, we're aware, we also know where the documentation is and how to engage in the peer review panel process, because I think, again, in addition to reporting on our results, we really want to emphasize this new lever, this new mechanism for seeing these results really turn into this tangible allocation of resources that we have not seen before, right? We have not had a faculty-led initiative for allocating resources, so I do want to make sure we highlight that. So on the portal page, in addition to the template for the assessment report, you can also find the peer review panel funding proposal form. So, you know, there's a paper copy in front of you, but you can just go ahead and grab the Word document here on the portal page. So I'm just going to pull that up in the last few minutes we have together, just highlight this process. So there's a cover page that talks about the process, how it's laid out. So I will just kind of briefly cover it for you. In that there's $30,000 right each fiscal year, so July 1 to June 30th for faculty. You know, it's a budget line item, and it's for the peer review panel, which is made up of members of the assessment fellow and assessment committee who are sitting on that, reviewing the proposals and allocating resources. And so this year, I want to emphasize this too. It is a shorter process by the nature of us getting it up and off the ground this year, right? This is the first year that we're doing it. It was better to get it off the ground and get it moving than to wait till next year. So we're doing that, but the process is shorter for that reason. So the next time that we do this, next fiscal year, there'll be, you know, the entire basically fiscal year. We'll start again in September through June 30th to collect data, submit proposals, and receive funding. So it's a little bit more abbreviated this year. So yes, we recognize that, we understand that, but also, you know, moving into next year, the process will be in place and we'll have a full year to engage with that. So there's this cover page here that you'll see that explains that process. And then as we scroll through, you'll see an example in the spirit of good assessment practice, right? We are showing the tool that's going to be used for evaluation. So expectations are clearly laid out up front. This is going to be the evaluation rubric that the panel will use to evaluate proposals. So in order to be considered for funding, it needs to meet all of these expectations. So just know that this is a little bit of your checklist to make sure your proposal is robust. And then as you scroll through there, I wanted to also be clear on this. There is one general proposal form, which is this page here, that everyone needs to fill out. Okay, so we're asking you your name, your department, the date, what are you requesting? So funding for curriculum revision, professional development, technology, and then there's an other box because I feel confident in our ability to get creative. So what do you need, right? There's an other, what is going to help you improve student learning in your classroom? We are open and up for that. So we have the categories here. We're asking you to summarize the research and evidence that supports this request, including your attached assessment report, and then also to describe the goals, objectives, and anticipated outcomes. So everyone will fill out this top form. Also note that you do need signatures at the bottom from your chair and coordinator and your dean. So because this is the allocation of resources, right, you do need the approval of those signatures to submit your proposal, okay? So everyone will fill out this top page. There's a few other documents included, and you only have to fill out the one that is relevant to what you are requesting. So if you are requesting a course revision, there's another sheet to give more details on the course revision. If you are requesting professional development, you would fill out the general proposal page and the one on professional development. And then same thing for technology, and then same thing for other. So if you're going to get creative, something we haven't thought of or listed, you'll fill out that page as well. Now, I would encourage you to look through that document, review it. There are important deadlines and dates, as well as things like signatures that you need to consider. So I would encourage you to do that. Beth Dunn is the chair of the peer review panel. So if you have questions, you can reach out to her. There's also the entire panel, right, of other individuals who helped. Oh, Jenny, Gabe, right? So there's some experts in the room. I hope I did your proposal forms justice. They worked very, very hard on those. So please look through those documents. If you need support, right, your colleagues are here to help you do that. But we're excited about that process. So I would encourage you. Another reason to get your reports in this semester if they are done, because then you can leverage that. Also going back to Justina's point, she has data from fall. You may want to complete one because then you can submit that data for the peer review panel before the May deadline. So there's some strategy there as well that might play into it. So again, if our colleagues who are reviewing those, there is a pool of money that's there. So I would encourage you to engage in that and get your proposals in so we can allocate that money. Okay? And then again, if it's already been approved for the next fiscal year, starting July 1, we'll have another $30,000 for next year as well. So planning that, right, with your assessment plans for next year, what could potentially be allocated to assist with that. Okay, so with that being said, we have one more of these scheduled, and we also, this is being recorded, so this will be posted on the Center for Teaching Excellence Blackboard shell. You can come back, refer to it. When this link is ready, I'm going to send out the link for the training as well as this documentation, so you'll have everything that you need. As always, if you have any questions about the reporting document, please feel free to reach out to me. You'll turn it in the same way as send me an email with your report when you're ready to turn that data in. And then if you have any questions about the peer review panel, I'm happy to answer those questions. Christopher Clem, as well as Beth Dunn and the peer review panel will be happy to answer any of those questions as you go through the process. It's our first time doing it. We're really excited about it. And also, again, there'll be opportunity for feedback on how the process went and what we can do to improve moving forward. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming. It was great to see you all. And yeah, talk soon. Thank you.
Right, side by side.